Hey guys, it's Chris. From men who were sentenced to thousands of years in jail for their crimes, to ones that were sentenced to well beyond that. Join me as I reveal 10 of the longest prison sentences ever. Number 10, Terry Nichols. Anyone who's familiar with the Oklahoma City bombing knows that it's one of the greatest acts of domestic terror ever. You'll also know that the leader of the event was executed for his crimes, which you would think would be the end of it right there. But what most people forget is that the bomber had an accomplice in the form of Terry Nichols. Prior to his incarceration, he held a variety of short-term jobs working as a farmer, grain elevator manager, real estate salesman, and ranch hand. He met his future co-conspirator Timothy McVeigh during a brief stint in the U.S. Army, which ended in 1989 when he requested a hardship discharge after less than 1 year of service. In 1994 and 1995, he conspired with McVeigh in the planning and preparation of the truck bombing of the Alfred P. Murrah Federal Building in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma, on April 19, 1995. The bombing claimed the lives of 168 people. While McVeigh was killed, Nichols is still serving life in prison, which is where his very high prison count number comes in, as he was given 161 life sentences to be served consecutively without the chance of parole. Given that the average lifespan of a person is 79 years old, that means that he was sentenced to serve 12,719 years in jail. Number 9, Martin Bryant. Martin Bryant more than earned his place on the list of most notorious people in the world when he committed the Port Arthur Massacre in 1996, and it's still considered one of the greatest tragedies to happen in Australia. He killed many people, injured a whole bunch more, and committed various other crimes along the way. Thankfully, he was caught and convicted, but because of the gruesome and heinous nature of the massacre, it led to a worldwide reform on guns that still holds to this day. He is concurrently serving 35 life sentences, one for each person that he killed. But there is a bit of a twist in this tale, mainly because the court decided to add years to his sentence for the wide variety of other crimes that he committed during the lead-up to the massacre. As a result, not only is he serving all of those life sentences, he was given another 1,035 years of time in prison. Obviously, he won't even come close to serving all of that time, but it's a unique way of making sure that he gets the maximum amount of time served. Number 8, Charles Scott Robinson. To keep things from getting too graphic, we won't fully disclose what Charles Scott Robinson did. It's just not right. We will say that he violated a young child in multiple ways before getting caught and forced to face a court of his peers in Oklahoma. If you say, well, that's an open and shut case, you would be right in all the ways that matter. Mainly because it took the jury all of 35 minutes to go and sentence Charles to being guilty of all the crimes that he committed upon the child. Now here's where things do get tricky. Because of how the laws are in Oklahoma and the crimes that he did, he wasn't able to get life without parole. However, to ensure that he never got out of jail, they did the next best thing. They sentenced him to 30,000 years in jail, 5,000 years per every guilty count filed against him. Cheating? Not really, more like stacking the deck to ensure that a very guilty man never hurt anyone again. And now for number 7, but first, be sure to subscribe to World List if you haven't already. Number 7, McLaurin and Anderson. This is the story of Alan Wade McLaurin and Darren Benelford Anderson, a pair of criminals who were caught for a whole variety of crimes, including kidnapping, larceny, and more. Eventually, they were sentenced for a combined 6,000 years in prison, which at the time was a record. But like in many cases, there were a couple twists in the case. You see, later on in their sentence, they decided to appeal their case to try and get a lower amount of years, which is really odd when you think about it, because even if they got half the time, they'd still be in prison for thousands of years. But in a very weird twist, when they appealed, they actually got sentenced to more jail time. Yes, more! They were upped from 6,000 years to a combined 32,500 years combined in prison, which is the most that anyone has ever gained for trying to appeal a court ruling. But just as ironic, 1 year later, one of them had another appeal and had 500 years taken off the sentence, which I guess at this point is kind of a literal drop in the bucket. Number 6, Gary Ridgway. Serial killers are both a rare breed of criminal and yet are more common than you might think. And one of the most infamous of them all was the Green River Killer in Gary Ridgway. He was originally convicted of 48 separate murders. As part of his plea bargain, another conviction was added, bringing the total number of convictions to 49, making him the second most prolific serial killer in United States history, according to the cases that can be accounted for and confirmed. He killed many teenage girls and women in the state of Washington during the 80s and 90s. They say that the connection between all the women and girls that he killed were that they were all workers, if you get our drift, or ones in vulnerable circumstances and thus wouldn't be on guard around him. He was so unremorseful in his confession that he noted that it was his career to kill them. He could have gotten the death sentence for his work, but instead he made a plea deal, confessed to most of the killings, 49 out of the 71 by his numbers, and was given 49 life sentences and an additional 480 years on top of that. Number 5. 2004 Madrid train bombers. The 2004 train bombing that happened in Spain is the deadliest domestic attack the city has ever suffered, and as a result, 3 men were caught, arrested, and sentenced for their crimes. One of them was Jamal Zougam, who was a phone seller before the attack. He was given 49,922 years in jail for his crimes. A Spaniard, Emilio Suarez Trasores, who supplied dynamite in return for drugs, was sentenced to 34,715 years. There was a third man convicted of the crime and was given 2 years more than Zougam. However, there are several twists in this particular tale. Mainly that after the investigation and the government proclaiming that it was a terrorist attack, no ties to various groups could be found among the 3 convicted. This led to several protests and demonstrations where people told the government to tell the truth. Just as important though, because of Spanish law, even though these men were sentenced to tens of thousands of years in jail, they'll only actually be able to serve 40 of them. Number 4. Charles FOSSARD. If I were to tell you that a man served 71 years in prison, you maybe think that that was interesting. But if I told you it was a record in the prison system, you might be confused. Because as you've heard and seen, there are men who have to spend thousands upon thousands of years in prison. But this is where the twist comes in for one Charles FOSSARD. You see, when you get sentenced to prison, many are expected to live out their terms, whether they're 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, or more. But for FOSSARD, he was arrested in 1903 for killing a man for his shoes, and he remained there, where he went when he was 21, until he was 92. Which means he spent 71 years in prison, a record that holds to this day, and one that many people, not even the worst of the worst, will have to spend, because more than likely they'll be dead before they even get close to that number in terms of actually being in prison that long. Number 3. HENRI PAROT. In Spain, there is a separatist group known as the ETA, and they've been the source of many bombings and attacks that have hurt Spanish people over the many years of their life. One of them was HENRI PAROT, who was not only a member of the group, he was tied to various acts by the ETA, including a devastating bombing of a Spanish barracks. He was arrested on April 2, 1990 in Seville after an exchange of gunfire with the Spanish police. In 1990, he was given a 4,790-year sentence for 26 murders and 166 attempted murders between 1978 and 1990. He was also convicted of involvement in the 1987 Zaragoza barracks bombing, which killed 11 people, including 5 children and 2 women. Number 2. ERRES Massacre. A massacre is never a good thing in any context, but the ERRES Massacre that occurred in ERRES, a small village in the municipality of La Libertad in the northern Patan department of Guatemala, was one of the worst ever for a very simple reason. The people who were killed in this particular incident were 100% innocent. They were rounded up and killed in various ways despite no true crimes being committed. They even killed very young children in absolutely brutal ways for the simple reason that they wanted to save ammunition. While the massacre was absolutely terrible, nothing was done about it for 3 decades. In December 2011, President Alvaro Colom made a formal apology for the massacre on behalf of the Guatemalan government. And months after, 4 soldiers were sentenced to 6,060 years in prison for their part in the massacre. In March 2012, a 5th soldier was further sentenced to 6,060 years in prison for his participation in the events. While this absolutely was a case of too little too late, at least a certain kind of justice was served to those who survived, and can now at least rest a little easier knowing that the people who committed the massacre are behind bars. Number 1. Chamoy Fund. It's rare for a woman to become a serial killer, which is what you might think Chamoy THIPY is based on the fact that she has one of the longest prison sentences in history. However, she actually never physically hurt a person in her life that she would be arrested for. So why did she get a massive prison sentence? Simple. She ran a pyramid scheme and hurt a lot of people financially. In the late 1960s, THIPY started a chit fund called the Mae Chamoy Fund, Mae being the Thai word for mother, which was made to look like an oil share with high returns. Obviously, it wasn't, and by the end, she had over 16,000 clients in her scheme. She did get caught, but there's a twist when she did. On the 27th of July, 1989, she and 7 accomplices were convicted of corporate fraud. She was sentenced to a total of 141,078 years of life imprisonment in prison. But Thailander law at the time stated that the maximum sentence that could be served for fraud was 20 years. In actuality, she only served about 8 years of the sentence. That's right, a woman sentenced to nearly 150,000 years in prison didn't even serve a small fraction of that amount, all because of the land she was convicted in and the laws they had at the time. Thanks for watching. Was there one particular sentence that shocked you in this bunch? Can you believe that you can actually get sent to prison for longer than you'll even be alive? Let us know in the comments below. Be sure to subscribe to World List, and I'll see you in the next amazing video.